There you go.
Okay, didn't do the little message.
Let's wait 1 minute.
Yeah.
It takes some time.
Got it.
Where do you physically work?
We're on right off Franklin Street, Carolina Square, 123 Franklin Street, top floor.
Is that like West Franklin? And that new building?
The new building, yes, same place.
Target?
Yeah, right beside the Target. Yep, we're on the top floor there, where research development and research communications, all the other OVCR offices are up there.
It's a pretty nice place to work.
Yeah.
All right, let me introduce you to people who drift in. So, good afternoon, sports fans. I'm Bob Sandler. I'm the director of the CGIBD, and I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Jonathan Crabtree. Dr. Crabtree received a BA in economics from UNC, also a master's degree in information science and a PhD in information and library science. He was recently appointed as the inaugural director of the Research Data Management Core, which is what he's going to tell you about today. Before that, he was the director of Research Data Information Systems at the Odum Institute for Social Science. And prior to the directorship at the Odum Institute, he had a lot of other positions. And before that, he worked at the UNC School of Medicine in information as an information system technologist. His education and training is very diverse. It includes electrical engineering, library and information science, digital preservation, computer science, economics, geographic information systems, hydrology, and geomorphology. And you need to pay attention to this, because if you have an NIH grant, you got to do this. You have to have a plan, and you have to be able to share your data. And I'm sure people have questions about that. So that's what we're going to learn about today.
Yeah. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. It does seem like a long path to here. So I've actually been at university a little over 31 years now. When I started over here in the School of Medicine IT, it didn't look like it does today. It looks a little different. Lots of new buildings, lots of new places. But many years ago, I sat over down below Bondurant down there. So we worked over there and helped build networking. I run some of the networking in some of these buildings around here many years ago, before the networking was actually here. So, but what I want to talk about is this research data management. For those of us that have been doing a lot of archiving and sharing, this is not new. Other places, it is very new. So we need to talk a little bit about what does it mean, right? Because there's more to it than just research data management. We need to think about it as a life cycle and talk about the mandates. And I'll talk a little bit about the core and why we created the core, and then how we go about doing this data management sharing and support for that. There is a fee associated with this, but honestly, the OVCR and OSP handle all of that. This is just one of the many things that's supported by the Vice Chancellor's office, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So data management is really the process of validating and organizing materials. Everyone does it all the time. You had to manage your data in order to do your research, right? You do it all the time. But it gets a little more tricky when you start sharing it with other people, right? Quite often, even sharing it with yourself. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you go back, I want to rerun that study, right? Did you really remember what all those variable names meant? Did you label them R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, or did you put valid labels in there? Or do you have heaven forbid, you got a code book? Do you have a code book that tells you what all that stuff means, right? A lot of people just skip that step, right? Or they had a grad student that did it. They did a great job with it, but the knowledge left with the grad student, and they're gone. So how do you do that? And it's all in these different parts of the research lifecycle. It starts before you ever begin. Good data management starts before you ever propose the project, right? Work through the collection and capture of the data, the processing of the data, all the way through to the ending, which is the archiving and preservation for the future. You hear this term a lot. And the reason I want to put it here is because everybody talks about fair data, right? It was for many years, people were making data findable. They were making it accessible. They were making it interoperable and making it reusable. But with this new acronym, it just caught on. And many funding agencies, including NIH, are really pushing towards making data fair. And let's be honest, we were talking earlier just before the presentation, what does it mean to make it reusable, right? If I have a research study that, say, for example, it's a qualitative study, can someone else go reproduce that study? Can they reuse it? Well, it depends on how well the data was formatted and shared and all the methodology around that research study. So we need to think about it as a unit. I would say in many cases, let's make it as fair as possible. Given the restrictions that we have, you need to work towards fair. And it's more of it's an idea, a concept, it's a principle, it's a guiding principle. That doesn't mean everything can be shared. It doesn't mean that everything is to be perfectly fair. Things can have a cost. Things can be sensitive data, for example, with human subjects. Sometimes you just can't share that data, especially, for example, if you have contract agreements with external agencies, corporate folks, right? You want to protect that intellectual property sometimes. So you can't share everything. That's okay. You're trying to get as fair as possible. And if you look towards the NIH as how they think about data sharing, and this is their language themselves, they want to make it as efficient as possible. They want to make the data sharing so it enables other researchers to look back at what was done. They want good practices, and they encourage the fair data principles. Even if you can't achieve them all, they encourage to work towards that. So I mentioned earlier, this is not new. A year ago, January 25th, a little over a year ago, in 2023, the policy took effect. But 10 years before that, they were talking about it. And even 15 years before that, it was one of these ideas that they were talking about sharing. So you've had to write data management sharing plans for a long time, and NSF is the same way. But the big difference is now it has teeth. If you say you're going to share your data and how you're going to share your data, they can go back and look at it. And if you don't, it can impact your future funding or even current funding for renewals. The challenge here is the requirement is not only at the end of the study, but it's also when you publish. So if you publish in the middle of a study, your data needs to be published along with your article. And several disciplines have been toying with this for many years, but for many disciplines, this is not the norm. You don't normally have to publish your data at the same time you publish your article. And at the end of your project, it has to be published and archived in accordance with your data sharing plan. Now, the key here is after the project's over, you don't have funding, right? The funding's gone. So you have to think about that, what it's going to take to fund that going forward. And that's what one of the things that we're here to kind of help people think about. And this slide is actually for folks with other funding agencies, but the White House has now said that by December 2025, all federal agencies must comply to the same policy. So it's all funding agencies, no matter where you get it from. It's gonna expand, and even some of the foundations are looking at buying into this and doing this. So I think from what we've seen, this is going to be across the board. This is not new at UNC Research to provide resources for people all across the research academia, because there's all kind of mandates that's happened over the years, right? That you've had IRB ethics, human research ethics, and IRB restraints. There's all sorts of research integrity things have changed over the years. The UNC Research is putting forth as much effort as possible to provide support for researchers here, because we want our research enterprise to be supported. We want it to be the best it can be. So that's the idea behind creating the Research Data Management Corps. It's just one of many things that the OVCR's office is doing to help data management. And they've actually been doing it even before that. They've supported things like Qualtrics and REDCap and Dataverse and Lab Archives and many other things, Encore, all sorts of different projects around campus to support research data management through the life cycle. They've been doing that for a while. Research Data Management Corps is meant to coordinate all of that, plus add to that, make it a force multiplier, so to speak, so we can make things even better than we had in the past. In order to do this, we can't just wait until the end of the project, right? If the research data management core contacted everyone at the end of the project and said, okay, now give me all your data, right? We're going to archive it. We're going to help share it. We're going to get it in the right repositories and all that. Let's assume that's what we want to do. Be super hard at it. Lots of research has shown it's actually 3 to 5 times more expensive to do it then because you're not ready. You don't have any metadata. You don't know where the data came from. You haven't been planning for it all along. So it needs to touch all of this life cycle, which means that Research Data Management Core is going to have to establish a campus-wide data support system and an ecosystem where we can connect the dots. So when you've finished working in, say, a core over in the med school, there's a pathway out of that core into a sharing environment, right? It could be for generous repositories, our UNC Dataverse here, that's up to 2 terabytes per study, that's free of charge, but it may not belong there. It may belong in dbGaP for genomics data, for example, belongs in dbGaP. There's lots of different repositories that NIH recommends for those, and RDMC can help you decide which place you go. And that's the planning and the policy. We work through that process, but we want to connect all the dots with infrastructure. So it's easy to do. We don't want to make it hard. It's not researchers need all the help they can to keep this from being another thing they have to do, right? Because you really want to get on to the research and do the stuff you want to do. And many argue that data management is really the heart of the research, right? And you shouldn't dismiss that as part of being part of the research. But we do want to make it smooth as possible so you can move. We also have policy we need to create, creating a pipeline for pre-award review of those data management and sharing plans, tracking those within the system, within Ramses, so we know who submitted what, when, and where, and monitoring for new policy updates, because we do feel that things are going to change. They're going to migrate. We've already seen, for example, in the genomics area, some of the sharing requirements in genomics have changed along the way as people start implementing some of these processes. So we consult on all of this. We help and review the data management plans. One thing I do want to clarify is we do a couple different levels, and we'll talk about it a little later, but nothing is mandatory at this time. No one is saying you must come to RDMC, you must submit it 3 to 4 weeks in advance, we've heard at times. We want you to help as much as possible. And the earlier you come to us, the more help we can give you. But we'll help no matter what. Our job is to try to get these things into the funder as much as possible and help you along the way. All of the folks, most all the folks at RDMC are researchers themselves, and we know the ideas of the deadlines. We understand that sometimes these opportunities come up. And sometimes you don't have 2 to 3 weeks, right? You only have a short period of time to write the proposal, get a budget, to work with Ramses, work with your administration to get that through. So we want to be a part of that team to help you do it as fast as possible. We're also going to do training. We're going to look at training folks on the best practices for data sharing. We're also going to help with the compliance component. We're going to show people and train people how to do this. As in many of the areas that I'm talking about, we may not do all the work ourselves. We may coordinate with existing agencies and different groups on campus. For example, in training the library, UNC Libraries does great training. So we're going to work with them to implement a training program through them so we can work with all the campus infrastructures here so we can connect the dots, so to speak, and leverage all that's here. Because we're here to be a force multiplier, not to replace anything, but to help out with everyone else. One thing that to note, we have noticed in the last year since we've been looking at these, the 3 darker shades of blue here, the planning, the archiving and preservation, publication and sharing. These are areas where many people need help. They need assistance to understand. They've been doing their research for many, many years, often great research during the data capture, the data collection, processing, analyzing, and writing their papers. But quite often is that publication and sharing part, is the archiving and preservation, especially when it's after the research is over and they don't have any funding for that. And then planning for this, thinking about it holistically as a research lifeline. So how can we help? We can help review the policies. We can work with all your researchers and administrative folks to be sure that we're finding the relevant policies and guidance, and we can help you with that. We'll talk a little more. I got a few slides on some of these other things. The DMP tool, if you haven't heard about it, it's a great tool. It was actually invented out in California by the California Digital Library. We've been working with it for, I guess, 10, 15 years probably. It's tied to the Onion. You can use it there. But what's nice about it is you can share your data management plans. You can collaborate with other people. You're able to have multiple people assigned to that. You can save the templates. It's templates set apart by funder. We'll talk about that a little bit more. It's very exciting. I think it's something you'll find very useful. We also do review, and we'll talk about our review. And then Ramsey's. You'll see some changes in Ramsey's we'll talk about that have happened. I guess they've happened since November. So the DMP tool, it's not required. That's another thing that I want to be sure everybody understands. You're not required to use the DMP tool. If you want the RDMC group to give you a full review of everything, we want you to put it in a DMP tool because that's how we can share it. You can create a URL and people, it's just like a Google Docs. You can share that thing and both of you have access to it. But what's nice about it is there is sections based on funder. You can choose your funder, choose your program, and it prompts you for everything you need to put in a data management plan. You can save your own data management plan as a template. So for example, we've had many researchers say, I've been writing data management plans for a long time, and they are good, they're acceptable. You can put that in the DMP tool, and then others can use it. You can share those with other folks, with your colleagues across research centers. So it's nice. It's a nice place to be able to organize and share. It's based. You can have simple fill in the blank languages that you can use, and you can share it with your colleagues and friends. So we encourage that a lot. We also encourage you, if you have time, to contact us. You can go to our website. We have a help button there and open up a review where you can submit all your information. You can submit the information about your grant. We can help you write a better DMP plan. We're looking at all of them across campus, the ones that are successful. As we build a corpus of information, especially in the DMP tool, we can see where people can leverage better opportunities to get funded more often. So we can help with that. It does take time, right? So if you're at the last minute, we just don't have time to go through a full review, but we even can do an express review where we won't do every single thing we do in the other. We won't meet with your project team, talk about your data collection efforts, what kind of data, what formats. We can't go through that detail part, but we'll definitely hit the highlights to be sure you're compliant so you don't have a problem with your funder. We've had some situations where funders say, even before the submission, that draft data management plans won't allow you to submit to this agency. And we've been able to go back and work with the privacy office. We're in one case with the Carolina Data Warehouse, CDWH, and work with them to change some policies that would allow that researcher to apply for a new grant that they were told that their data management plans wouldn't allow them to apply for because they couldn't share the data appropriately. In Ramsey's, you'll see some new fields. Many of these things are required, but we're not enforcing as far as if you don't fill out these, you won't be able to submit. There are many places in Ramsey's that if you don't have XYZ in Ramsey's in that IPF, that you won't be able to submit your application. At this point in time, we're not doing that, but we're collecting data. For example, if you're collecting PII or PHI in your study, we need to know about that so we can review your data management plan so you're dealing with that appropriately. We want to collect all the data we can, and we want to look at that. We can have a URL for that DMP tool. If you have that, we can access your data management plan. Eventually, what we'd like to do is enable this to be intelligent and pull data from the DMP tool via APIs and connect to make it easier. So you don't have to fill out all this stuff. They can pull it back and forth. You can have an active, a machine readable data management plan that can populate things within Ramsey's. That's the world. We're not there yet, but that's the world we're getting to. Right now, we're collecting data so we know about which projects have data management plans and where we can use them. We're looking for things like if you have large data. As I worked at the Odom Institute, I had someone call me, for example, a researcher said, we got funded and now we need to store this data. And I said, okay, that's great. We'll see if we can help you. It was sensitive video data of children, right? HIPAA data, purple data, all kind of red flags. And it's video, big formats. Oh, and guess what? We're going to have over 2 petabytes. They had no money in the budget for it at all. They didn't plan for it. They didn't think ahead about it being sensitive and hard to collect. And it's big. Well, if you were to tick the box here, it makes you think about that. Then we can talk to you and work with you to be sure you include those things in your budget, so you don't have that thing later down the line when you have a problem. So we can help out with those things. There's a on our webpage, there's a need help button there that can get you help with all of the different tools, whether the DMP tool or submitting a proposal or the Dataverse. You can go there. And as always, you can always send us a note, ask us questions. We're here to help. We're part of the team here at UNC to make research better, and that's why we're here. Happy to answer any questions either online or.
Got a question about money.
Yeah.
I know it's not your office of vice chancellor, but I've asked them and I didn't get an answer. So
Yeah.
the core exists to help people collect and store data.
Yes.
The people that collect and store data are researchers.
Mm-hmm.
I run the center. I don't collect any data. I don't store any data.
Right.
They charge me.
Yeah.
It gets worse.
Yeah.
So we also run some cores where we collect data for clients, some of whom don't even work at UNC, and the charges go into program income account, and they charge us for that too.
Yeah.
So the same piece of data gets charged 3 times by the investigator, grant, the center, and the core. It seems like unfair.
Yeah. And some of that is definitely an application of the OSP. I would definitely have you ask OSP on the application of all that, because it's a new program, it's a new process. If it turns out that it's truly a duplicate, right, they will work with you. That's what they're there to do. They encourage us to encourage everyone to be sure that your grants are labeled appropriately within Ramsey's, right? That's because what ticks on you need a fee or don't need a fee. So for example, if you're a equipment grant, for example, that is nothing but equipment or a training grant, those are non-applicable to the fee at all. It won't get charged, but there's a certain code in Ramsey's they need to have. You have to be sure that those are ticked. Those boxes are ticked there, and OSP can help with that. I would talk to Amanda and David at OSP can answer the logistics of whether you were charged appropriately or not based on how your grant is. The other piece to that is the funding of the overarching program of data management here. There are many things that are not just RDMC. The Vice Chancellor's Office spends lots of money other places. So they didn't want this just to become one more thing they have to suck out of everything. And since NIH is allowed a line item for data management, that's why they went there. So they're trying to come up with a holistic way to plan for things, even after the grants are over, right? So there are some people that won't be paying a fee because their grants are over, but will still be managing their data in the Dataverse or in their archive long after the project's over. So it's a community effort to build this ecosystem that supports data even after the projects are over, it's hard to do with this individual project. So quite often it is, even though you're not using the service at that time, it is still applicable because it's for the whole research ecosystem.
So that brings me, I don't want to monopolize it, but that brings me to the next question. And so the good news is you can build this fee into your budget.
That's right.
But if you got funded last year, it's not in your budget.
Yeah.
But people are being charged anyhow.
That's true.
Was there any thought about like phasing it in and applying this to new grants?
There was, and Andy and the folks at OSP have talked to us about it. I've heard them say this a many times, and they're the people to talk to about this. They just couldn't figure out a way to roll it out in a phased approach because of this issue that there will be times when people will be paying and not getting services because it's after the end of the grant. And it was just such a tumultuous way to do that the only way they could do it is roll it out across the board. Now, I will say that is one of the things that if you approach OSP and Andy Johns and say, look, this was funded prior to January 25th. This is something that I don't have it in my budget, right? They're sensitive to those needs, and they would talk to you about that. If it's a case where you truly just don't have any money, you've spent the money, you don't have any money there, and even though and you didn't plan for that, so this is outside your control, they will talk to you about that. Of course, I'm not the authority in that. That would be OSP and Andy John's office, the OVCR, and they can help you with that. But I do know that Andy is sensitive to that, because that's not fair. I mean, if you spent all your funding at your end of the project and you don't have any money to pay that fee, that's tough. That's tough.
We have some online people.
Mhm.
Audra, if you want to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Dr. Crabtree. Thanks for spending your afternoon with us. I have a couple of specific questions, one of which Dr. Sandler just asked. But my next question is, could you please clarify on storing data within databases such as Dataverse for data that are already being hosted by things like the Sequence Read Archive or other NIH-supported repositories? Now, do we need to have them on both of these, a UNC supported database in addition to an NIH database, or not?
No, absolutely not. Now, I wish in a perfect world, my job of auditing whether people are compliant or not would be much easier if I could say, everybody put it here, and then I could check it off the list. That's not practical or possible, right? And honestly, they don't belong. You need to put your data where the discipline needs it, right? That researchers are already putting stuff in NIH approved repository. That's where it's going to go, and it's going to stay. It's not going to have a copy here. Now, having said that, as the director of this new group, Penny and the VCR's office is going to ask me, did they do that? Did they store their data? Did they share it appropriately? Well, I have to find it, right? I have to, when you did it? So I have to develop systems in order to do that. And that's a challenge, but it's a challenge that we have to take on. There are strategies for that. So, for example, most all of these NIH repositories have DOIs or object identifiers attached with them, right? We can scan by those at, for example, UNC uses something called DataCite, which provides DOIs, and RDMC funds that effort for UNC to mint DOIs, which are the digital object identifiers, right? We can track that through those systems. There's metadata in the background where we can pull down and see what researchers store data where. Working with the library to look at publications, to look at PubMed, look at places that reference data and try to create audit reports. It is a huge challenge, but that's my challenge, not yours. Yours is to put it where your discipline requires it. And if you're already submitting it to a NIH approved repository, all we need to know in the data management plan is where is it at? And then we can look there and we will create the audit reports to be sure you're compliant. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So to build upon that, so if those data are being stored on an NIH repository, will there still be a fee applied to the investigators? I mean, because the data aren't being hosted here, so I'm unclear on what that fee would be supporting.
Right. So the fee is not just for the storage of the data, right? If that's all it was, that would be easy, right? We could just pay the storage in wherever it belongs. The fee is to develop the ecosystem to help people, train people how to archive data better, how to manage their data, the right metadata that needs to be there, to develop the ecosystem here, to work with, for example, work with the Carolina Digital, the data warehouse and the folks at the privacy office to be sure that we can be applicable to all the grants so we can apply for those grants, to work with this entire ecosystem to support things like REDCap. We had a meeting today where we're trying to figure out a way to support REDCap as it evolves into another system. Some people use REDCap, some people don't, but they won't be, it's not a fee for service, right? Like many cores are fee for service. You spend money, you get this. That is not the way this was designed. It's an ecosystem that even long after your grants are over, you will gain services for this, because we will be, for example, looking at those research repositories and writing reports to the Vice Chancellor that, yes, all our researchers have deposited data in the right place. So it is more of an ecosystem funding rather than a support for services, if that makes sense.
Okay, well then the third question develops on the prior to. So as someone who actually attempted to use the Dataverse as recently as, just last week, it was rather unwieldy to just, submit things like, Excel files, raw data from, experiments, things like that.
Right.
Will there be, some support available
Absolutely.
for, a dedicated individual or set of individuals who can help to upload the data in a meaningful format? Because honestly, like the upload tool itself is not particularly intuitive to use. Can you kind of shed some light on that and what their plans might be?
Yes, there is a spot on our website where you can go and ask for help with Dataverse and get training and work with that. What we at this time, we don't have the resources, or in the fee will never cover enough to where we can have staff labor to go into your lab and process all your data and get it all ready, right? It could mean de-identification. It could mean lots of huge amounts of work. Those are direct costs for your grants. And that's included in your grant. That's where we will help you write a good data management plan that includes all of that labor in order to do that. Now, we will provide guidance. We will develop better tools. For example, if your lab has a certain type of data format that doesn't belong in another NIH repository, that it really doesn't have a proper home, but you're required to share it, then what we can do is find a way to integrate automated processes to get it into Dataverse so you don't have to go through that laborious process. So for example, data format that social scientists use, statistical formats like SPSS or R or Stata, those have tools that generate metadata for those. As they're ingested, as you upload that file, it'll actually load that file, read it, create metadata, so you don't have to create all of it, right? If you have a format that's coming out of your lab that is a special format, we'd like to know about it, so then we can write tools that ingest that in a much better method, and we can help do that, design that, and that's what we're here to help.
Thank you.
Evan?
Yeah, thanks so much. Sorry, let me get the camera on here. So I really appreciate Dr. Crabtree, the overview of the core, and I think it's going to be, very useful for new projects going forward. Not to kind of harp on this again, but I really need to go back to the point that Dr. Sandler made about this fee being applied retroactively to previously established budgets and contracts. And I just have to say flat out, it's not appropriate, and I don't think it's right. A 0.5% fee, of course, for any investigator could be nominal, but when you apply that to the more than $1 billion at UNC, that's $50 million you guys might glean every year from this fee, which is a tremendous amount of money. And I just went through a couple of grant, progress reports, getting new grant years, and the fee is being taken off. And this is a major problem. And I'll give you an example. One of the grants was funded 4 years ago. It was cut 20% off the top. My own effort on the grant had to be decreased by more than a quarter. And we don't have the resources to complete the study. And yet this fee that is not even applicable to this project is being pulled off. And I understand that it's got to go through the vice chancellor's office, and I'm, in process with that. But I just wanted to provide additional feedback that I think it's completely inappropriate to apply this retroactively. It's certainly possible to roll this out for prospective studies and newly funded studies, but for across the board, and that's before you even get into industry studies where contracts have been negotiated and we've had, fees flat out rejected because it's not in the contract. So I think going forward, I'm more than happy to budget this, plan for this, use these resources. But for, many, many studies that are out there, and I would think many investigators, it's a major problem. And, for any one small study, it's not an issue, but across someone's research portfolio for an entire year, it actually adds up to a substantial amount of money. And so I would appreciate if you would bring that back to the research office and to OSP and try to have a solution that gets applied to all researchers with existing grants currently.
I absolutely feel your challenge, your pains. If I'm the one on your side, I'm going to say the same thing. A few things I will have to raise a few interests. You mentioned it was a 0.5 fee. Well, it's not 0.5. It's actually 0.38 is the number.
Okay.
And that's what is the number now. And that turns out to be a median monthly charge here at UNC of $20.49. That's what the number is. And we are not, I don't know where the 50 million comes from. I'm not exactly sure where that comes from. I'd love to have that. The Research Data Management Corps' budget is a fraction, a tiny fraction of that. We're looking at, we've only done it for a few months, but we're looking at less than $200,000 a month, right? We're listed at less than $2 million a year for that 1 point whatever $billion enterprise. So it is not near those numbers, but still it's $20.49 you may not have. And I understand that, or it might be $2,039 you don't have. And if you don't have it and you didn't budget for it, I am totally sympathetic for that. But Andy is the person to talk to. Andy can handle that and work with you. And I will bring this back to them. We actually have a presentation Friday for the faculty council. I'm sure this is going to come up. And they've heard it before. This is not unusual. They do hear this.
Yeah, no, and I understand that for a number of people, it may be a nominal fee, but a nominal fee across the entire research endeavor here, 0.38% of $1 billion is far more than $200,000. And so, you know, whatever the overall amount may be, I think the issue is applying it to established budgets where there is no wiggle room. And you know, for this particular grant, it was $700 or $800, which would pay a 1% of one of my research coordinators to work on it, for a fee that does not apply to the study. And I mean, and quite honestly, I'm telling our accountants not to pay it. I will not pay it. And so I think for these retrospective things, there really needs to be a change. And again, everybody, I'm very happy to use it going forward on all new proposals, but I just won't pay them on these things, even small amounts. But actually, at least for my stuff, it's not a small amount. And the work that it's already taken to have permission not to pay the fees for you know, contracts that are in existence, I'm sure is far more than whatever the lawyers on each side would charge to go back and forth and try to update the contract. So I do appreciate it if you could bring that back to them. I've tried to email, and quite frankly, I haven't gotten a response for 6 weeks.
Yeah, well, I can definitely, I present with Andy on Friday, and Penny and Andy will present on Friday. And I'm sure this will come up, and I know that he has responded to folks. I will mention to him specifically.
Okay, thank you so much.
Terry.
Hey, on a change of topic. So the work in my lab is mainly on the genomic side. That, you know, we're generating a lot of that type of data, and we're you know, are using the existing repositories. But you know, if you've ever had to work with some of those existing NIH repositories, they're not the simplest things to work with, and especially, you know, uploading large amounts of data directly from the UNC systems is not always straightforward.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, in the push and support for this, is there any talk amongst the data management corps of providing, you know, or developing tools to help, you know, people like me more easily upload our data to some of these existing NIH repositories?
Absolutely. That is one of the things that popped up first. We've been spending this year looking at across the establishment and where are the hot spots, where are the things that we need to interject some effort into. And one of them is in the ability to upload genomics data and manage genomics data, the size and breadth of it, the complications of it. We've worked with the folks over at the Library Cancer Research Center. They have a workflow there, but unfortunately it's very manual, right? There's a lot of people involved. We've been working with the folks over at School of Medicine to develop a workflow that we can better handle that to make it easier and lower that burden, because you are exactly right. That is a challenge, and we've already met with several different groups. One in particular is just to deal with the enormity of the size of that data. The folks in the microscopy lab, for example, Michelle Atano and their group have the same problem. They have huge amounts of data and really no way to move it around. And they work in the world of petabytes. So we've been meeting with some vendors with the School of Medicine to talk about ways that we can come up with solutions. And that is part of our plan, is to create connections between these areas. And that is a pain point we've already noticed, and we are working on.
All right, great to hear.
Susan?
Hi, Dr. Crabtree. Thanks for coming today to talk to us. My question was backing up a little bit to REDCap. You had mentioned that you all are working on kind of the next system that we can have, which I hope you're alluding to, the Part 11 compliant. And I'm wondering if you can give us a timeline of when that will be available. We've been waiting for years, quite honestly, and I'm hoping it's soon.
Yeah, it hasn't been long. I guess at 1 o'clock we had a meeting, and I had several folks start talking about timelines as well. Yes, it is a challenge. So the Vice Chancellor's office is working for a solution. They're actually on the clock here, because the current support for that within the track system is losing some funding at the end of this year. So July is a ominous date that's coming fast for all of the REDCap support. And the Vice Chancellor's office has created a group that's looking at it. We are part of that group. They're looking at the best way to handle that situation. We have created, for example, last year, the clinical trials folks needed a CF21 Part 11 compliant archive to store studies with the signatures that had to be CF21 Part 11 compliant with the clinical trials. So we did create a system that you can do that. There's a Dataverse that's CF21 Part 11 compliant, so you can place those studies in there. But what we want is the ability to not just the archive, but also to have REDCap that's CF21 Part 11 compliant. And then at the end of the study, you can literally push a button and it moves it over into the archive. So we create that workflow from where REDCap is. You're working in a compliant environment, you push a button when you need to publish, and it pushes it into the archive. That is something we're working on. I wish I could give you a timeline. I don't have a timeline. I know that they're asking us what resources we need to do it as fast as possible. And we're putting together the resources, and we will only be one part of the bigger team, especially the archive side of REDCap. But we're working with Robert and the team. We met with them today to figure out what it's going to take to make this happen. So yes, you're exactly right. We've been waiting far too long. A lot of these things we should have done 6-8 years ago. Just didn't have the coordinating groups, the people that were in the right place to do that. And that's kind of what RDMC is here for. We're here to try to bring people to the table and get the right teams together so we can get researchers what they need to do their jobs.
Right. Thanks. Just one quick follow-up comment to kind of tie together a couple of the other comments is we really need REDCap for a lot of the projects we work on, but we don't have what we need. So we now collect our data on paper. And so our projects are charged the fee for the data management core, and we're still back in paper land. So I know you're working on it, but that's just a real world example where those of us out there doing the data collection, that's what we're doing.
Absolutely. And feel free that if you want to go ahead and touch base with our groups, maybe we can find you some interim solutions for that, so you're not stuck in paper land. That's not a fun place to be.
Oh, so would that be you, like this email?
Yes, you can go to the Need Help there. And yeah, you can go to the Need Help there and say, look, I'm creating, I have these issues and I'm trying to collect data, but I have these challenges, because you're going to have to share that data, right? You're going to have a plan for sharing that data. And the plan might be, I don't share it, but I need to store it somewhere. So we can help you with that process.
Okay, thank you.
Topo asked, is it possible for the RDMC to apply for external funding to support your efforts?
We actually already are. We have a couple different efforts right now. IMLS has funded us, I think it was a $2 million funding award to help us build some infrastructure here at UNC, but you're exactly right. That's what we're doing. We're looking for ways to bring external funding. For example, for this genomics workflow, we do think this is in a very important area, and we think that's a fundable project, and we're looking to not only invest our dollars that we're generating, but as well as funding from outside as well.
Anybody else have any questions?
I asked you before.
Thank you.
I asked you before if people looked at the stored data, and you said they look a lot.
Yeah,
Can we see who's looking at our data or get pinged when somebody makes a request?
absolutely. There's many different ways you can do that, and it depends on the repository where you're doing it. So for example, Dataverse, you could set that up where no one gets anything until you give permission to let them see it. And you can ask for whatever information you would like to know about. What study are they going to use it in? How are they going to share the data? What purpose they're using? You can have embargoes, all those types of things. Yes, you can do that. It depends. For example, many of these things go to like dbGaP, right? So dbGaP may have different methodology for doing some of that, and I'm not certain about all of those, but we can ask some of our folks that are data stewards that are on the ground that are working with that. And I will say, we're also very new, right? So I'm just trying to get folks hired. And we're getting through the HR system and getting people on board with the skill sets needed here at UNC. So we've got 4 positions in recruitment right now, and 4 more right behind that. So it's going to take some time to get those folks on board, but we will do our absolute best to answer questions as quick as we can.
Anybody else? I think that
That's
we
great.